Hello, and welcome to this video on reshaping your data frame. Um, we're going to talk about two general ways to reshape your data. The two main ways are going to be to make it wider or longer, and we'll talk about what that means. We're also going to talk about making pivot tables and what all that entails. So as always, we'll first start off by loading in Pandas, and then we're going to load in the Pokemon CSV and look at it. Now, to make it easier to understand what we're doing, I'm going to get only a subset of the Pokemon data, only the first 20 rows and the columns from type 1 to defense. We're also going to drop NAs to make it a little more clear what's going on later. There we have our subset. Now let's talk about pivot tables. A pivot table is going to be used when you have one categorical column and another categorical column, and you want to put one into the index and one into the column names, and then fill that in with values. So we specify what our index column is going to be, what our columns column is going to be, and then what column is going to be the values. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So there's a few things to notice here. First of all, let's look at the intersection between bug and then dragon. That's a null value. If we look, there's no instances of bug that match up with dragon in the second column. So that's why this is null. Also notice there's many instances of bug and poison. And so what this is going to do is automatically take the average of bug and poison for the attack column and put it in right here. And so we may not want to just get the average. So instead we can specify an ag function or an aggregation function and say maybe we want the sum. And so that'll give us a lot bigger numbers because we're summing them, not taking the average. We can do things like take the sum, the max, the min, the mean, things like that. One other thing I think I should mention, this is a form of going from data frame and making it wider. And so this doesn't look like much wider of a data frame, it doesn't look like it has more columns than our original subset. But let's say we're working with our original data, or as many rows as our original data actually had. So we had 14 rows. And then let's try that again. See this, because we have a lot more categories in our type 1 and type 2, this is going to create a really wide data set with a lot of columns and not nearly as many rows. This is why we call pivot tables something that's going to move our data frame in a wider direction, or make it wider. But I'm going to undo that so we can get a good idea of what we're doing. And then we'll go on to if we want to use multiple aggregation functions, or multiple aggregations. We can do that by just specifying a list. I'm going to save that in PT for pivot table, and then we'll display it. So we notice we have now multiple layers of columns here. We have the mean for dragon flying and poison, and the sum for dragon flying and poison. So we specified mean and sum. Now we've talked about ways to get out of this situation where we have multiple levels of columns. But one new way we're going to learn is called stacking. So right now we have a very wide data frame, and we're going to stack it to make it longer. If you think of stacking things on top of each other, that makes it taller or longer. So we'll use pt or pivot table dot stack, and that will make it longer. And that doesn't really return a data frame to us, but we can force it to be a data frame by putting it through this pd.dataframe method, and then we'll save it as stacked, and we'll look at what that does. So we took this layer from the columns, and we put it into the index here. So dragon flying and poison are now in the index, and mean and sum are left as our columns. Notice the stack method is automatically deciding which level of columns to slip into the index. And we can actually overwrite this and force it to be the 0 or the first level, or whatever level we want, if we so choose. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the first level here and slip that into the index. So let's look at what that looks like. And there we go. We've left dragon, flying, and poison in the columns, and we've put mean and sum into the index. This is a way of making our data frame a lot longer again. So we're basically trading having multiple levels in the columns for having multiple levels in the index. But we can make that trade the exact opposite way. Trade off multiple levels in the index to have multiple levels in the column, and that's called unstack. It's basically undoing the stack function, making it wider again. So let's look at that. There we go. We've basically got ourselves back up to what we had up here. But just like the stack method, we can specify which level we want to unstack. So here, instead of, so we had our original stacked data frame right here, and it had bug and flying. Now we're specifying that we want the 0th level, so we're going to take bug, fire, grass, and normal and put those into the index instead of flying, poison, and dragon. So that's all for stack and unstack. The last thing we want to know is melt, and that basically allows you to make your data frame much longer. And I think the best way to talk about this is to just show you what's going on. So let's look at that. We've got we pass in, for this function, we actually have to pass in our data, which will be subset. And then we have to specify the ID vars, which are going to be one of our categorical columns. And then value vars, which is going to be a list of other columns that we want to work with. So what it's automatically going to do is give us, first of all the categories from type 1, every instance of type 1, and then the HP. So it's going to give us like HP for grass, fire, and normal, and then it's going to give us the attack for grass, fire, normal, and it's going to give us the defense for grass, fire, and normal. This is going to give us a lot of redundant data and very much exploded out data, which can be useful in some circumstances. So I think there isn't too much more I want to mention about this. I think I'll just say that notice we have this back on the subject of pivot tables. We have this 3x3 chunk of the data frame is going to be the same as this, because that's the sum part, and then this 3x3 chunk of the data frame is the same as this. This is what we did, getting the average by default, or the mean by default. And so this is just getting those both at the same time in one data frame. I think I forgot to mention that detail. But beyond that, that should be everything you need to know about reshaping your data. So thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I'll see you around.